or control in the future global economy. If you can sit back and control the task.
Hey, everybody, it's Dave Hooper, and welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole with me, Dave Hooper. So, good day, Wednesday. Eric, how you doing today?
Oh, sorry, I had the mics off. I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Oh, good. Did anyone hear what I just said?
Yeah, your mic's were on. My mic wasn't.
All right. So,
there's something different there. We kind of used the YouTube to use the intro, so it's a little different coming into the
gotcha.
the break. I'm not used to it, but you know how it goes.
So
that's why they pay me the big bucks.
All right. So last week we had a few callers call in, and do you want to tell me what it was that some of the feedback you got?
It wasn't a caller. It was actually on Facebook. I posted something early about the show. Down the rabbit hole with David Hooper, conspiracy theories, and I threw a bunch of stuff in. I don't remember the exact verbiage that I used. But one of the listeners listened in, and he chimed in about the show, and he was like, "This religious crackpot, blah blah blah," and I was like, "Just calm down, man. This one show." And he's talking about probably one of the greatest conspiracies ever, the Bible. You know what I mean? So I said that, and a bunch of other people chimed in, and they were like, just give him a chance, Uncle Mike. And I told him this guy directed a movie about 9/11, the great conspiracy, and it went from there. So you take it away from here.
One thing, so I was thinking about it, because when I originally was going to present this stuff, I was going to go at it in sort of a chronological order and build a foundation for how this world got to the way it is today. Why are there so many conspiracy theories out there? And maybe I went a little too far back in time, because I do understand something, because it took me a long time to ever correlate the two.
Well, and I think that's what you were trying to get at with the whole thing, because we talked about in the beginning 10 or 15 minutes, we talked about all the different things. The conspiracy. We talked about 9/11 real quick. We talked about a few other things. And then you're like, well, this is where it started. And then you just ran into it. And, I guess some people aren't as patient as I am, David.
All right. Well, so I decided to redo today. We were going to originally be talking about archaeological evidence of giants that have been found all over, on all continents. But change that up a little bit today. And you know what we're going to do today? We're going to have Conspiracy 101. So, before we get started, I'm going to say this to everybody listening. I don't want you to believe me. In fact, I want you to prove me wrong, because it's only when you see this with your own eyes that it actually starts to affect your heart. So let's just go back to the basics. And let's start this from a different perspective. And let's start off by, what is the definition of conspiracy? Well, according to Merriam-Webster, a conspiracy is a secret plan made by two or more people to do something that is harmful or illegal. Pretty simple. So, one thing I find interesting is 9/11, which you mentioned. And I got started on this whole path because I found something wrong with 9/11, and as I investigated it, it became very clear to me that this was a conspiracy, not the one that we've been told about. And it led to many other, following the leads from that investigation, which I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, have really just wiped out and rebuilt my belief system. And I run across a lot of people that, I've mentioned some of my friends that are, highly educated, real smart guys that will just look at the evidence and look me in the eyes and say, well, I'm just not a conspiracy theorist. So if you think about it like this, when it comes to 9/11, we're all conspiracy theorists. So you either believe that 19 guys in caves conspired with box cutters to successfully attack the most well-defended building on the planet and the two icons of America, and failed with the fourth plane, which was heading for the Capitol. So you either believe that these 19 guys pulled this off, or the other side of the coin, where I think you'll find the just about half the population now believe that it was some sort of an event with help, internal help at least, if not outright planning and execution from certain powerful elements inside our own government. So either way you slice it, let's just get something straight. We're all conspiracy theorists. We're not going to really talk about 9/11, but when you study 9/11 and you find out that the 48 cameras or whatever it was on the Pentagon were shut down, the air defenses were cleared out of the way, all of the simulations that our military was running literally that morning to simulate a terrorist attack, adding to confusion of the event, the media's cover-up after the fact. These are things that 19 guys in caves cannot do. They just can't. There are a lot of so let's just stick that one on the burner. We're not going to really get into 9/11 today. That's a whole different show. But if you want to watch, go look up the movie The Anatomy of a Great Deception. You can find it at agdmovie.com. It's all over the internet and YouTube. It's been viewed about 20-some million times by now. And that's a foundation to begin asking questions so that you can begin the process of opening your eyes. It was the first red flag I personally found. A lot of people see this information and they just go about their daily lives. For whatever reason, I felt moved by it and felt I needed to do something with it. So going back to your listeners, some of the listeners that were confused about why we would be talking about the Bible in a conspiracy show. And I guess, I have to say is I guess I understand the confusion, because I was 8 months into 14-hour-a-day research into 9/11. And by now I knew that the Federal Reserve was a completely corrupt system, and that many other legitimate conspiracies had some teeth. They had some there was something to them. There was at least something to be looking into. I started to realize this long before anything was related to the Bible or was religious in any way. But I will say this, before I began this whole process, I was really not a religious guy. I just went where the evidence took me. And I think that's something we all need to ask ourselves. Are you someone whose knowledge is determined by what you believe? Or are you someone whose beliefs are determined by your knowledge? And you see, and there's a big difference. A lot of us, we have a worldview that is formed by a combination of our parents, television, and our peers. And we tend to live our lives within the information that's been presented to us. And when we get information that falls outside of our worldview, that is impossible in our worldview, a lot of people just shut it out. Whatever it's been attributed to a psychological principle known as cognitive dissonance. And that is when you are presented with a piece of information that does not fit your map of the world. This causes, I think it might have been the origin of the quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." That was certainly true in my case. As I was discovering these things, it was a very uncomfortable period in my life. There were things I knew that I did not want to know. And when you put yourself out there as a filmmaker doing these kinds of things, you also invite some attention, good and bad. Someone on a prior show had asked, had I ever been threatened? Not outwardly, but certainly have had veiled threats come my way. It also did something, and that is I started attracting people that had the truth and wanted an outlet for it. I've been approached by members inside of our government telling me things that the general populace wouldn't just be able to know. So there are, and I'm not alone in this, there are thousands, if not millions of people that are going through this on some level, in some way, shape, or form. And it was a very hard thing to adjust to. So one thing I want to say is, I get it. The callers, they don't understand the link between the Bible and conspiracies. It took me a long, long time to figure it out. So I'm going to go back a little bit. I wasn't religious when I started this. I just want to say I went where the evidence took me without any preconceived assumptions. Now, that last statement, without preconceived assumptions, much easier said than done. It took a lot of practice, and you'd be surprised at some of the things that are so certain to the average human on this planet that are the foundations of other beliefs, yet they're built on falsities. So, moving on. Along the way, my belief system crashed, as I've talked about. I'd been someone that was opened up to everything. I started looking at raw empirical data. This is the original data. When people say empirical information, this is the core information. It's not what you see on the news, which has been washed and regurgitated and has been edited and it's been cleaned up. Many parts omitted, some parts highlighted. It is that is not empirical. Any research will be able to discuss that. So I was shocked to find that what I had stumbled on was clearly predicted throughout several prophetic books of the Bible. Because ultimately what I had stumbled on was events such as 9/11 and JFK, some of the things that we consider the face of conspiracy theories. All of these events, which seemingly are leading us towards this one world government, I was very surprised to find that had been prophesied throughout several books in the Bible. In fact, last week I'd started off talking about Genesis. And the reason is, it's the first prophecy in the Bible is that the seed of Eve would be in a war against the seed of Satan. So now, of course, I didn't believe the Bible at this point. And whether you do or not, let's just not worry about, let's just consider this for a moment before dismissing it. The supposed creator of this world predicted that there would be a battle between his children, God's children, and essentially the opposers, the adversary. Some call him the devil or Satan, formerly known as Lucifer before he fell. So I found that to be astonishing because as I looked into this, I was beginning to find just evidence I could not deny that there really is a spiritual war manifesting itself on this planet. It's in the form of information and what we believe. Or I should say that is one aspect of it. It will certainly also manifest itself in the form of tanks and guns and airplanes and blood. But the esoteric agenda behind it is what is hidden. Esoteric, hidden. The hidden agenda is what I came to view as what is important, is what is the driving force behind these events. So I was going to try and do this from a chronological order going back in history and do it over several shows. But after getting some feedback, I'm changing that up. We're going to do a super quick recap of how we got from Adam and Eve to today, spending a little more time on some of the things that are current day. So this is going to be almost like a bullet-pointed recap. And here again, don't believe me. Look it up for yourself. Do your own research. All I ask, though, is you stop getting your information from that television set, that mainstream media television set. Because if that's where you're getting your information, I can guarantee you will have no idea what is really going on in this world. So let's move on. It was predicted that the seed of Satan, Satan himself, ultimately would want to bring this world into a one-world government so that we would all be forced to praise him. That was his goal. He was kicked out of heaven for having pride. He wanted to ascend to God's throne. He believed he was equal to God and should share in his glory. That obviously was not the case. God kicked Satan and his angels out of heaven. This part gets very important because these angels that were kicked out of heaven, some people know them as fallen angels or demons. This is part of Satan's current military structure that is in total active duty today. Now, to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, first of all, Satan, the Satan that is discussed in the Bible, whose story was predicted, and in other books that are non-canonical, but still, let's say, most likely influenced or that have some, that are written with the same sort of spirit of God behind them that other books in the Bible have been written. And another thing I want to say is, talking like this 5 years ago, if you would have told me I'd be saying these things, I would have laughed you right the hell out of the party I was at, which would have had beer and strippers in it. That was me. That was my life. I was a bachelor living in Chicago. I owned my own company. It had been my fifth or sixth one. I was successful. I had a life right out of Playboy magazine. And believe me, it was fun. So in a lot of ways, I sure as hell did not go looking for this. But I also am the type of person that, where truth is, I do want to seek it. And I do believe it there are just some people that care about that and some that don't, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. And my point is I'm as surprised as anyone else that we'd be talking about this stuff, that I'd ever be saying it. So I guess I'm still getting over that. So I'm able to speak with a little more certainty, at least for my own heart, my own belief system, because I've been able to spend, a better half of the last decade researching this full time. And I'll never be able to put in a show that's a couple of hours, or even into a movie that's a couple of hours, 10,000 hours worth of research and interviews and testimonies and corroboration, and it's just not possible. The only way that this will ever mean anything is to ultimately look into it for yourself. Back to the beginning, before man was here, there was a rebellion in heaven. Now, I'm not here to answer questions about why, if God is perfect, why would he have created Satan that was imperfect? To be honest, I don't know. God doesn't explain it. But I will go from what was written, which, not because I was looking for God or looking for Jesus or looking to fill some hole in my life, but because this is where the evidence took me. So what I've come to discover is that many of the predictions and much of our history that was written in the Bible that we seem to think, and I certainly thought, was mythical nonsense my entire life. I was into my 40s before this even popped up on my radar screen. So there are probably theologians that have been doing this since they were 18 that could perhaps explain it better and fill in. I'm going to do the best I can, get us up to modern day, because we are going to fly through a quick history of the world from God's perspective. And that might shed some light on some of the forces that are going on behind this world that fuel the inconsistencies we find everywhere that some people call conspiracy theories. So back to the beginning, before humans were here. There was a rebellion in heaven. Satan somehow convinced a third of the angels in heaven, God's kingdom, to rebel. And again, I'm not going to get into why or how. I don't even have that answer myself. I suspect some things, but that's just personal conjecture. And when I say God's words, understand that the Bible is made up of 66 different books. It's written by 40 different authors spanning different languages, different epochs, different continents. These guys were not coordinated with each other. All right? It's very important to understand that.
There was no meeting.
No meeting. Now, the funny thing is when
There's no internet book club that they
when I used to think of the Bible, I used to think of it, well, the book was written in one sitting.
Right, by a bunch of scholars that sat together and talked of woes.
But what the Bible was assembled over 1,500 years and put into its final form at the Council of Nicaea, which I believe was, I might have got the right council. Anyway, this was about 400 AD, and basically that is the Bible we have today. I will say this. If God created the world and created humanity, and he can predict the future, if he has that power, I'm guessing that he has the power to also keep his words whole and keep them protected throughout history. And we now have discovered, when we can go back and uncover the Dead Sea Scrolls, we now know for a fact that much of this writing truly was in existence even as much as 1,000 years before Jesus Christ, predicting his appearance. Now, to us, it all seems like one big moment in time called the past. But you have to understand it. From someone that's living in the year 5 BC, they have been getting predictions about the appearance of the Son of God. And many of them are prepared for it. But you know who else would have been prepared if the story's true is the opposer, Satan. He knew that the Son of God would be coming. And wouldn't it be just like him to begin work so that when the Son of God did appear, he would be rejected, which is exactly what the religious governmental hierarchy of both the Romans and the Hebrews did. They rejected him, even though he fulfilled 153 different specific prophecies about his coming. Now, anyone that understands statistical analysis, when you actually run a basic statistical analysis on what the probability is that Jesus Christ was truly the Son of God, I'm more certain of that than I am of Eric being sitting here right next to me.
I'm right here.
And it begins, the predictions now, which were in writing 1,000 years before his appearance, that he would come from the state of Nazareth. He'd be born in Bethlehem. He would enter Jerusalem on a particular day, and ask yourself, and he would do it riding a donkey. He would do it walking on a bunch of palm leaves. It also predicted that he would have been crucified, and during that crucifixion, none of his bones would have been broken. Now, interestingly enough, when this was first predicted, crucifixion wasn't even a known form of execution or torture. In fact, it was somewhat of a mystical, it didn't have much meaning until the practice came into effect. There are certain passages in the Bible where that same dynamic is happening today, where the book of Revelation discusses how in the final war, the war which culminates with the Battle of Armageddon, that the land will be scorched. You won't be able to touch it for 9 months. That the weapons that we have will allow the entire world to be wiped out in a single fell swoop. But you need to understand that prior to, say, 1930, that sounded like crazy hogwash, because we didn't have the weapons we have today, such as nuclear technology. You could not conquer the world with a sword or with a musket. And the world knew it. So these passages which were cryptic back then, as history has evolved, now all of a sudden, holy shit, make sense. Now you have to understand, this same dynamic was going on back in the days prior to Jesus. A lot of the predictions were just, frankly, couldn't be understood by the people. Anyhow, getting back to the origination of all of this. A third of the angels fell. Now, somewhere in Genesis, we're talking about the number was given of that there are 1,000 times 1,000 times 10,000 angels, as in that was the size of the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you do the math, 1,000 times 1,000 is 1,000,000. You multiply that by 10,000, you've got a population of approximately 10 billion entities. Now, if a third of them fell, we're talking about an enemy force. And when I say enemy of God, which would be my enemy, hopefully it is your enemy. And if you don't know that's your enemy, then it's your ally. And I'll get more into that later, because ignorance is not going to be a get-out-of-jail-free card when all this crap hits the fan. Anyhow, so this could imply as many as 3 billion fallen angels or demons. Now, that number just seems utterly staggering. So let's just, let's forget what God said, and let's just say there's 1 million angels in heaven, a third of them fall. We're talking about right there 300,000 demonic entities, which are here. They're now part of Satan's military. They are now trapped here for treason, essentially, against the creator of the world. Their only hope is now to follow Satan and hope that he either wins or... I'm not going to talk about what their hope is, because they have no hope. Nonetheless, their future was set in stone when they did what they did. So just from the first rebellion in heaven, we are looking at, we're looking at a staggering number of entities that never sleep. They've been working under Satan's command to usher in this one world government while keeping those plans hidden from most of the world. This is what this is the core function of Satan's military. And this is not like some plan that he just came up with since in 1950. He has been preparing through his human envoys. He has been preparing and setting the table for this since essentially since Jesus Christ was crucified. We're going to get back to that one in a minute. We're talking about a very sizable force here. Something else that brings questions to my mind, but we're not going to get into this now, is there was a second rebellion in heaven. A lot of people don't know this. After humans now were on earth, there was a second rebellion. Now, this rebellion involved 200 hyper-powerful watcher angels. These are much more powerful than the vast majority of the angels that had already been kicked out of heaven and were now stuck on our plane, our world, whatever you want to call it. These angels rebelled, and I suspect because they were convinced by Satan to begin mating with human women. Now, here's where the story of the Bible starts to get crazy. And a lot of people that are actually couched in the Bible they're not even familiar with the most important theme of the entire book. It is the purpose of the book. So there's a lot of little pieces we're going to be putting into play here. These fallen angels, as the story goes, not just in the Bible, but much more clearly talked about in the book of Enoch. It's a book I recommend everybody read. Enoch was the grandfather of Noah. Enoch, according to Genesis, walked with God, and Enoch was the first human being that did not die. He was just pulled out of earth and taken up to heaven. This book, the teachings of Enoch, these are the teachings of a man that walked with the creator of heaven and earth. Now, whether you believe that or not, I guess that comes down to just hold your, let's suspend the judgment on whether it's true or not. And again, let's indulge ourselves a little bit here, and let's just pretend that these books have a lot more truth in them than we realize. My first suggestion to go do your own research, find out what's in the Book of Enoch, which ironically, the Book of Enoch was a book meant for the final generations. The book was hidden from the world for a long time, and it wasn't until we started discovering the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi, that we came to realize that this was an actual religious book that was revered amongst the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, essentially the religious order of the world at that time. Written in the book itself was the fact that this book, though, was really meant for a long, distant generation, the final generation. I do find it odd that that book has become incredibly popular just in the last 20 to 30 years. Okay, so let's see, where were we? Satan and the second rebellion, these fallen angels, they start mating with human women. Now, quick little sidebar. To this day in the Middle East, women often cover their faces. And I often see it presented as, those sexist Islamics, or those sexist, Orthodox, or certain religions that still practice this, which, of course, we're people of tradition. We tend to follow the traditions of our parents, whether we understand them or not. But originally, the reason for women covering their faces is so that they would not be seen by these angelic creatures, hence not tempted by them. It was a way of keeping your wife from being essentially taken. So these guys were able, they weren't, the Bible says they can't marry humans, but they were able to mate with them and create offspring. These 200 watcher angels, highly powerful, which had access to genetic technology, began to corrupt everything on earth. Everything from plants and animals and humans began to essentially, God's creation started to get effed with. Satan was starting to screw with it. Now, a lot of people wonder why the flood even happened. And people say, oh, well, the world was evil. Yeah, you know what, it was. But what was happening in the days of Noah that was the deal breaker for God? That he would essentially have to clean out the entire progress of humanity and, in a sense, start over. Well, it's interesting to note that the reason given for Noah and why he was saved is because he was unblemished in his generations. Now, I don't think that means that he had really good aunts and uncles and parents that were all holy. If you actually look at the origin of the word, you're going to find out that what they're talking about is his bloodline was not corrupted. He had not had any DNA that was non-human DNA that had been intermixed with him. His bloodline was clean. Now, Satan, knowing that, what was the first prophecy in the Bible? The son of, the seed of Mary, which would ultimately give birth to the Son of God, would ultimately destroy the seed of Satan. Ultimately. So Satan essentially knows that the Son of God is going to be born by a human woman at some point in the future. Satan knows this. He even roughly knows the geography of land where this is going to happen. Again, so many prophecies were written in the Bible. Satan's not an idiot. He can read these prophecies too. So Satan has an eon's head start to start littering the gene pool in an effort to contaminate the entire gene pool so that there would be no whole, clean remnant left from which the Son of God would be born. Now, why is this so important? Now, here's what I find so fascinating. Because we did not understand genetics or how they work until the very recent past. It's only been in the last 15 years that we've actually mapped the human genome. Now, here's another thing we found out. This one surprised me, although I've seen research studies that prove this on the back end. If you've ever seen a study that shows, you take two twins at birth that get separated through foster homes, that mom and dad go to jail, two twins, they're in the foster program. One twin is raised by a wealthy, law-abiding family. The other twin is raised by... my point is that there was an absolute correlation between the incidence of the probability that your offspring would commit a crime based on more your gene pool than on your, not solely, than on your socio-cultural surroundings. In fact, we've also discovered that, let's say I committed a murder prior to my having a child. We have now found out that when you commit certain acts, which God called sin, it actually puts a scar on your DNA, which is carried for several generations. Now, I used to think God was a jerk because, you mean if my ancestors sin, you're telling me that he's going to punish me to the third and fourth generation of my offspring? That just didn't seem right to me. Unless, of course, it's something that, in a sense, not out of his control, but it is part of the reality that he created when creating the world. Because if God is a just God, there has to be free choice in his kingdom, which means if someone wants to rebel, they're free to have those thoughts. If someone wants to believe in the dark side, they are free to have those thoughts. He does not want to be a God that is loved by fear, which you will find a common denominator in almost every demonic kingdom that has ever existed on this planet, whether it's the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Aztecs. All of them did it through human sacrifice. Again, another clue as to where the demonic powers in this world have been hiding throughout history. You'll find common traits. Why is it that the same pyramids that we see in Egypt that have been surrounded with the sacrifice practiced by the Egyptians, we see these pyramids in other continents popping up at the same time, practicing these, what we would think are ridiculous, arcane rituals of killing your own blood. Yet Satan has figured out a way to bring that into the United States, and we do it because we have now, this country practices human sacrifice through abortion. I'm not here to put any moral judgments on anything. I'm in no position to, because I am one of the worst of the lot. And I already told you a little bit about my past, and believe me, it included every sin you could possibly think of. I've done them all, and I'm not here to ever speak like I am on some pulpit, or I know. My whole goal is to get people to look at this for themselves, because frankly, if what's written is true, which I've come to believe with 1 billion% certainty, not 99.9999, I am talking complete certainty that it is true. Most people aren't there. Many people are. It's something you've got to just see for yourself. Anyhow, offspring of these angelic creatures produce what are called the Nephilim. This is referred to in Genesis 6. Now, this is where the Bible starts to get a little wacky. Now, if you remember, I couldn't even consider looking at the Bible as a realistic piece of information because right off the bat, I knew evolution was true. I mean, that's what I was taught. I believed it. And within 6 chapters, the Bible's talking about how humanity was created out of thin air. I mean, really? And giants walked the earth, really? Well, where's the evidence of all this stuff? I mean, these are the things I'd say to myself. Little did I know that the evidence is all over the place. But if you think your mainstream news media is going to tell it to you, you're crazy. You are crazy. All right, so here's what's happening. These hyper-powerful angels start mating with everyone, and they screw up all of God's creation. I mean, who knows, maybe this is where the dinosaurs come from. And why the heck do we have documented, recorded evidence of dinosaurs and humans actually living side by side? Now, I know that's not what is taught to us in our textbooks, okay? But you have to understand, if I'm Satan and I'm out to deceive everybody, and I'm already in a position of power 2,000 years ago to bring Jesus Christ up to the mountain, show him the whole world and say, I can offer all of this to you today. If he's in a position, and it's not that Jesus said, you're not in a position to offer me this. Jesus just said, no, I turn you down. I'm going to have it, but later on, we're going to do it the right way. Do you think Satan somehow lost control of the world? This hyper-powerful entity with a military at his fingertips, which dwarfs the intelligence and the resources that any... Hell no. In fact, if I were Satan, I would have complete control of the media, and I would throw it out in different flavors. And this reminded me of a quick sidebar that I learned in my business, which I'm going to talk about for 2 minutes, and then we're going to take a break and pick this story back up. I used to have an eBay company, and we actually, you can look it up, whiteelephantmedia.com. That was the main brand that we sold through eBay. We were one of eBay's largest sellers in history. To this day, we are still in the top 200 sellers that have ever sold in history, and there are over 10 million organizations that have sold in that, just through that medium. What we were finding out when I was selling on eBay, and we were selling movies, music, books, things of that nature. And we'd grown to the point we were shipping out about 4,000 of these, 4,000 sales a day. Literally, we had a sale a second. It was a constant thing. Now, how did we get to that point? It's ironic that this sort of ties into what I believe is Satan's strategy. But if a dumb human like I can figure this out, in my lifetime, I am sure that this would have occurred to a hyper-intelligent entity such as Satan. Now, here's what I did, and maybe this is what he did. I'd get people that would come to my eBay store, and they wouldn't like my shipping prices, so they'd say, I'm leaving here, I'm going to go buy somewhere else. And I was losing that business. You know what I did? I started another eBay ID. I gave it different colors and different price points. And I kept doing it. And before long, we had so many different IDs on eBay that I would, for instance, get a customer that might not be happy with White Elephant Media's shipping prices, and I'd get a comment such as, I'm going to go take my business elsewhere. And 2 minutes later, I'd see a sale coming through for that customer who bought that movie from my company, but it was called Moonbase Media, a different entity.
For the same price?
At the end of the day, it was the same price. Yeah. But that one happened to offer free shipping, which was important. Some people like to buy from stores that are green instead of some people, different colors, different price points, different... And what we found out is we began to dominate eBay. We became one of their largest sellers in history. So if I'm Satan and I'm already in control of the world and I can see what's going to happen in the future, I'm not an idiot. Do you not think I am going to get complete bloody control of the media and begin playing this Hegelian dialectic on the human populace where he has us all looking between Democrats and Republicans, and that's where all of, yes, Fox is way to the left and CNN or ABC is way to the right, and these represent the spectrum of the human mind. But at the end of the day, what's really happening is outside of that spectrum. But we're not looking there because we can't even imagine that anything would be outside of that system. Because the media is presented to us as, well, this is the representation of all information on Earth. But if I were going to deceive people, I would sure as hell take control of the media, and I would allow it to, in a sense, organically do whatever it wanted to do up until one point, up until the point where it begins to reveal who I am or what I am doing. If it gets close on some things, I don't care so much. It's just going to add to the confusion, which that would be fine for me. And if any of you remembered my conversation from a few weeks ago on the power that comes with controlling money, you have to understand, if you remember my example in that little hypothetical universe of 1,000 citizens living in my little hypothetical island, if I'm the banker and I'm printing off money, I loan $50,000 to each of those 1,000 people. Well, guess what? Every person on that island has a net worth of negative $50,000, but my net worth is $50 billion, meaning I'm in control of the society. I'm now the king of that society. And I can say to them, we live in a free society, and make everyone feel warm and fuzzy. But if I don't like what some newspaper's printing, I could call in their loan, or I could flood them. I could destroy them another way. I could finance 10 other newspapers around the one I want to shut up and drown them out. So when you start to understand that concept, understand that if Satan's real, he has absolute. All right, we are back with Down the Rabbit Hole with David Hooper. And when we last were talking, we were talking about the second rebellion in heaven. These 200 angels, which started corrupting the entire, the information, essentially the code that is our DNA. This is the information that is behind humanity as an attempt to thwart God's plan and make him essentially be wrong, I think is part of Satan's motivation. Anyhow, when we talk about fallen angels or demons, or the word angel, it's like saying soldier. Soldiers can be both. They can be generals. They can also be grunts and everything in between. Even an army will all be working in unison for a common goal, even if the individual departments of that army aren't aware of the whole picture. The agenda comes from the top in any, not just military, but in a corporate structure as well, in almost any organized institution. Realizing the size of this army that it seems that we are up against was, for me, a shocker. I think maybe a lot of people can identify this, because to me, I thought Satan was nothing to worry about other than some renegade spirit that possessed 12-year-old girls like in The Exorcist. But that is not how he manifests himself. I think those movies are, again, he controls the media, controls Hollywood. And if you go looking for just go to YouTube and just type in, is Hollywood demonic? It is, and watch 100 documentaries. You'll start to learn it about Hollywood. There are certain institutions that help control our society, and you will find the footprints of evil all over them. Anyhow, this one was a shocker for me because, I thought Satan, as long as you're not possessed by Satan, you're fine. And as long as, what are the odds of that happening? There's billions of people on the planet. He can only possess one person at a time. I really was hardly worried about it. And I think most people probably think the same thing happens. Today, personally, I do believe that possessions happen. I've just seen too much evidence. And you know what? If anyone's listening that just thinks this is crazy, in one sense, I agree with you because I thought it was crazy too. But once it was presented in front of me, there's two types of people. Some will look into it and some will dismiss it. And I am not apologizing for people that dismiss it anymore. If you don't believe this, you don't believe it at your own peril. I guarantee you, at some point, everyone on earth, everyone that's ever lived will know the truth at the end of the day. Anyhow, okay, so I do believe possession happens, but what I should say, there are probably theologians that can better discuss this, that believe that mostly these possessions are done by a very particular type of spirit, and this would be the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. So this offspring of angelic and human parents that created what are called the Nephilim. Now these were giants. The Bible called them, these were the men of renown. These were the Nimrods and the Goliaths, and the Bible talks about how some of these guys were 18, 20, 30 feet tall. Again, this is incredible stuff, and I'm like, oh, well, this book is obviously ridiculous because this never happened. But the funny thing is, we'll get back to that in a minute. So, according to the book of Enoch, there were approximately 500,000 Nephilim that were born. So we're talking, in addition to the fallen angels, we now have another 500,000 disembodied spirits that are trapped on earth. Now, these are the types of demons. Now, and I say demons because they're of the demonic kingdom. These weren't angels created in heaven that fell. These are some sort of a creature with some sort of a soul that will never, ever be able to get into heaven. And these entities have to have a human host of some sort. Some of you may recognize in the New Testament where on several occasions Jesus, tells these entities to get out of a particular person and go jump into a herd of pigs, and then I'll let you read the stories. They're in there. I guess when I first read these stories myself, I was rolling my eyes going, okay, are you serious? I mean, come on. This is it's like out of a movie. Anyhow, one of the things I needed to understand was Satan is not a one-trick pony, and he is not by himself. I mean, we are talking about several ranks of angels. They are known as powers, principalities, authorities, archangels. These are different ranks in the demonic kingdom. These are also, by the way, the same names of ranks given to the angels in heaven. And I recommend you get into the book of Enoch to better understand this. It'll be difficult to understand what's going on in the world today without knowing about these fallen angels, because these guys play a very, very important role in what's happening today. I was originally today going to talk about these giants, and all I'm going to do, and I'll get to that in another show, but let's just leave it at this. There are hundreds of archaeologists, hundreds of thousands of photographs, newspaper articles going back to the early 1800s that talk about the discovery of not like a giant here or a giant there, but entire tombs filled with them. Interestingly enough, same exact story happens. There's an archaeologist working somewhere, stumbles upon evidence of massive skeletons. And I don't know if you can pull this up, Eric, right now on Google, but maybe you can look up images of giants, and you can start to flash some of them. Are there some hoaxes in there? Perhaps. Again, if I am Satan and I want to trick people, I'm going to distort everything. It's going to be very hard to I won't mind putting hoaxes in. I look at them, but look at the New York Times articles that have all been saved. Look at some of the headlines going back hundreds of years. It has been recorded in our history books, in our newspapers. It's just not taught to us. All right, so is this stuff crazy? Yes. But it's something that, when you see it with your own eyes, what are you going to do with this? Is it going to change your beliefs, or are you going to dismiss it because it doesn't fit into your belief system? And I guess I just chose to try and understand it instead of walking away from it. Many people can stare at the truth and dismiss it because they can't overcome the cognitive dissonance in accepting the facts. These are what people call the sheep. These are the sheep that are brainwashed. Now, one thing I love about having a radio show is that I'm not talking to any one person, so I can't hurt anyone's feelings. And I can maybe speak a little bit more about
You got a caller. Go ahead. Go ahead, caller.
Hey, Eric, it's Ellen.
Hey, Ellen, what's going on?
Hi.
Hi, Ellen.
This is Ellen from Freedom Works. And David, I'm listening for the first time, and I was excited to listen.
All right.
And I'm hoping that you can, you said you were going to go through a quick bullet point and take us from Adam and Eve until today. And so I'm just calling to say that's what I'm anxious to hear.
All right. Well, hang on, because we're about to speed up here. And we're going
to get into it.
We're getting there. We're getting there. All right, Ellen, thanks for lighting a fire under my butt.
Yep, we're all listening tonight.
All right.
Thanks, Ellen.
All right, bye.
All right. A lot of people call this the sheep. And I've called this, we are entering the war of the sheep. You've got about, 1 to 2% of the population that is fully aware of what's happening, that are actually working to bring in this one world government. And then you've got another 1 or 2% of the population that are fully aware of what's happening, and they are trying to expose this. And in the middle, you've got the vast majority of humanity, which are the sheep. And they don't know what to believe. They're just adopting the beliefs of their parents that were handed down to them, which were handed down to them. And basically, it's just, hopefully the sheep you're following isn't following another sheep that isn't following another sheep that's about to go off a cliff. And a lot of people, that is what they have their hope in. That's going to leave a lot of people very upset when the day comes. So this information, it's kept out of our mainstream media, which I've already explained. That is Satan's mouthpiece, because if it were widely known, a really big piece of the proof of the Bible and Satan's plan would be exposed. The theory of evolution would fall completely on its face, and that's the secret he just can't let out. And Eric, I don't know if you've got any of those photos going, but you'll find a common thread. Archaeological dig gets found. Immediately, one of two entities comes in and takes over the entire site. It's either a museum and or accompanied by our military. Now, Think about that. And the common story from all of these archaeologists, these researchers, is they take all of the bones, all the evidence, they cordon off the area. They're never allowed to go back on it. It's sent to the Smithsonian. Go look at the Smithsonian. You see a sun logo. It is a pagan logo. And believe it or not, museums, they really work to suppress the truth, not expose it. They will show the things that work with the story that we have been given. They will not show the things, at least not the big ones like the Smithsonian. They're not going to show the things that really reveal the truth. They use those museums, frankly, to hide that information. I cannot tell you how many researchers and archaeologists that I have heard from that have said their work was completely commandeered by the museum, only to have them told later on that we don't have it, we don't know what you're talking about, it's not here. Over and over and over. Anyhow, back to the antediluvian world pre-flood. God's creation was on the verge of a disaster. He saves the only clean DNA line, Noah's. He destroys everything else. He also does something interesting. These 200 hyper-powerful watcher angels, he says that he is going to bind them in chains for 70 generations. Now, the Bible establishes a generation in 70 years. The flood, and now, again, do your own research. See what geologists really have to say about how there was a universal flood that happened at once. 270 different cultures all discussed it. This came in one fell swoop. It is not this one is not mythical. By those accounts, the flood would have roughly happened in the year 3000 BC. I want you to remember that. And I also want you to remember that these hyper-powerful fallen angels with access to hyper-advanced technology were to be locked up for 70 generations. Well, 70 generations, it's 70 years a generation. That's 4,900 years. If the flood is approximately 3000 BC, this takes us to 1900 AD. Now, we're going to get back to 1900 AD in a minute. Let's just put that on the shelf for a second. It's not like Satan's military sat on their ass for 2,000 years, by the way. Over that time, it is so clear, again, if you look into it, Satan began the process of recruiting what we would call today as generational bloodline families. I mean, these are families that at some point some ancestor cut a deal with the devil, literally. And once you do that, you don't get out. You never get out. You only get out by dying. There are some that do escape under the protection of Jesus Christ. I came to find out it's one of the elements that started to point me to the fact that we might be dealing with something more than just a human plan here. His bloodlines are growing in numbers. This is happening throughout the Dark Ages up through today. His bloodline children are the ones that are put in positions of power across the globe. This is happening right now. Now, many of them defect. They try to warn the world. Many of them get their testimonies recorded or written about before meeting their untimely death. Of course, you'll never learn that by watching The Bachelor or The Kardashians. You're going to have to start searching for it. But this is the power of our world. Taken together, all of this paints a clear picture of what's going on in our modern-day reality. And again, I talked about this is an important piece. And, Ellen, before we get to modern-day conspiracies, I've got to finish a couple more things. Because this, without understanding this, it's hard to see how this connects us. It was predicted in the Bible long before these happened that after the Egyptians, there would be 4 great satanic kingdoms on earth. They would be Babylon, Greece, and what I'm going to call Rome 1 and then Rome 2. So let's talk about these for a minute. The Babylonians, they were under the rule of Nimrod, supposedly a hybrid. He was a giant creature, and if you actually look at the hieroglyphs on the Babylonian temple, if you look at the ancient structures that we still don't know how to build today, a lot of people suspect that it was actually these fallen angels, much larger and more powerful, physically stronger, that were able to build these edifices which still stand. And what's on these edifices? What's hieroglyphics? If you look at them, you'll constantly see little people surrounded by the rulers, which are giants. That carries on to the Greek Empire, which is now this second satanic kingdom. And there again, we find what is adorning the governmental buildings of the Greek Empire. It's these, what we think are mythical hybrid creatures. It's all over their art and their government buildings. And I ask myself, really? Because you think about it, does our government erect things like that to real historical figures? Yes. Do we erect them to, let me put it this way. I've seen archaeological evidence with my own eyes, as unbelievable it is to discuss, that these hybrid creatures were very real. So it doesn't surprise me that that is what we see on the sides of the walls of the government buildings of the 4 kingdoms I'm going to be discussing, because we tend to make statues and praise the gods of our world. And I believe that that's what the Greeks were doing. I mean, if they were mythical creatures, would we ever put a Yoda or a Chewbacca or a statue of Spock in Washington, D.C.? No, you're going to find statues of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. So try and understand that. And across most civilizations, these monuments are erected to the founders, the powers behind the system, behind the government in play. Moving on. You also find all these kingdoms practice human sacrifice, and their common denominators start to present a picture. Now, the Greeks then morph into Rome. And I find it also, if you think about it, all of those Greek gods became Roman gods. How odd that a complete different civilization adopts the same gods of a fallen civilization and just gives them new names. Zeus becomes Jupiter. Poseidon becomes Neptune. Were the Romans, were they praising a fantasy? Or were they now under the influence of these same gods, little g, that were behind the Greek Empire? I find it interesting that God would write in his 10 Commandments, don't put other gods before me. Well, who was he talking about? What other gods do you think he was talking about? It started to occur to me that perhaps he was talking about the gods of the demonic kingdom. They are God-ish in a way, but they're not the creator God. Certainly powerful enough to trick any dumb human into believing that they're God. We were warned about that. So, Rome 1 comes. This is the Caesars. This is the beginning of the financial monetary system we have today. This is when what we have today is our ruling international banking families. This is where at least we can trace their origins to them. Now we all know Rome died. But did it? See, God said there would be the Roman Empire, and there would be another empire, but it would just be a continuation of the Roman Empire that would be hidden. And this is what I'm calling Rome 2. Now, I do find it interesting, if you think about it, the Romans were never conquered, okay? But what happened to the power base of Rome? Well, it moved into several different areas. Number one, it merged into what would ultimately become the Catholic Church. The Roman Caesars, in the beginning of that Catholic Church, were the original popes at the Vatican. And interestingly enough, the same pagan symbols that you found in Babylon, in Egypt, in Greece, here they are, erected in places like the Vatican. We have a question.
Funny that you say the Roman Catholic Church, because Ellen, who just called in a few minutes ago, posed a question earlier, and she wanted to know how you felt about the Roman Catholic Church. And I'm assuming that this is where this conversation is headed.
This is not about the Roman Catholic
but
Church. That's only one arm of this whole operation.
Right.
And my mom is going to kill me because I was raised Catholic. And my mom is a diehard Catholic. And you have to understand something. There's a difference between Catholicism and Christianity. A lot of people don't understand. See, Catholicism is a man-made religion, and you are asking a human to interface between you and God. And I think whenever you do that, you are asking for trouble. So I do not believe, as Jesus didn't either, I believe in no man-made religion. I just would never put any faith into them. Because if they were corrupted, all you're going to do is carry on that corruption yourself. And you'll be shielded from the truth. So, the Catholic Church. What was the question again? What do I think?
Yeah, what was your opinion, I guess, of the Roman Catholic Church?
All right. So, again, it's like talking about the government. It's such a big enterprise. You can't give it these broad applications. Most Catholics are good people. They believe in God. They want to do good things. And I think most people on this planet are good people. But you can get a good sheep to run off a cliff if he's following the wrong sheep, if you follow me. Now, it would seem, we can't predict the future, but there is a prophecy in the Bible, and it talks about the this whore, this woman that rides the beast. Now, what the heck does that mean? I don't want to get too biblical here, but let's just back this down for 1 second. In the Bible, when they talk about a woman, they're talking it's a religion, and there's the Bible in a lot of ways is written in code, and you have to read the whole thing to be able to decode it. This is not my opinion. This is pretty well documented by thousands of years of research, and I was debating whether to get into why it's written in code. I'm not going to get into that right now. Code-ish. I'm not going to say fully. So it would seem to me, if I'm Satan and the Catholic Church, which is probably the most powerful religion on the planet, if I were him, I would absolutely try and overthrow the Catholic Church. And again, you don't do it by bringing guns to the Vatican. You do it from within. You do it quietly. You do it through a quiet conspiracy. And before you know it, the cardinals and the high-level ranking officials, the percentage of them that are aligned with dark forces starts to increase. And if you actually do a little research, and I suggest Stephen Quayle is a good place to start, Tom Putnam, two excellent authors that have devoted their research specifically to the Vatican, and they will unbelievable information on some of the things that are going out there. But I'll tell you this, because I certainly see it with my mom. If the Pope says something, my mom's going to follow it. Absolutely. If
this new Pope is badass, though, man. As far as popes go.
Well, this new Pope, if he fulfills the prophecy of Malachi, which was a prophecy made, when was this prophecy made? 1,000 some years ago.
Children of the Corn. Malachi.
He literally predicted every single pope.
Really?
Now here's the scary thing.
That's kind of scary.
This pope that's in power now, this is the last one. He said this guy is the last pope that will ever be. He is the false prophet. Now, according to St. Malachi.
He's going to live forever. He's immortal. He's a Highlander.
Now, and one thing I want you guys to consider is, I know we're all trained to think that when evil comes at us, it's going to come with robes and horns and pitchforks. But you guys, that is not how this works. If you're going to counterfeit something, I'm not going to bring monopoly money and try and pass it off as real money. I'm going to bring something that looks like real money, because I'm going to need you to believe it, okay? So get off this idea that you're going to see this coming a mile away. You're up against somebody that is a lot smarter than any of us. So the Bible discusses what's going to happen to Rome 1. They're going to morph into what's called Rome 2. Out of Rome, several different organizations are formed. All of them moving us now towards this plan, because something happened when Jesus Christ was crucified, because Satan tried to stop that from happening. He couldn't do it, which means that was a massive failure for Satan, because now it meant that everyone that was on earth had essentially a get-out-of-jail-free card, which meant they weren't going to Satan's kingdom if they called out, and all you had to do, the only requirement was to believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that he died for our sins. Again, the story didn't make sense to me at the time, but I knew what I was told. That was an incredible setback to the demonic forces on this planet. And that is when a new strategy began. And this would have been at about the turn of, we're talking about somewhere in the vicinity of 33 AD and onward. Satan's plan then converts from ruling overtly to ruling secretly. The kings, the popes, the Caesars, the power behind Rome enters the Vatican. It enters what we historically might know as the Knights Templar. Now, the Knights Templar would then become the Freemasons, the Masonic societies, the secret societies. It is one of Satan's best recruiting venues. It is where he has been able to maintain power by getting access to people that were not of his bloodline. Because, yes, there are stupid humans that will sell their soul to get financial gain. And when you go to these Masonic temples, you are rubbing elbows with the biggest bankers and all the powerful. Well, how did they get there? Well, once they're into that system and you move up high enough, again, you don't get out. And I'm not talking about some 10th degree Freemason. A guy like that has no idea what he's involved in yet. Just a portion of the truth has been exposed to him, and he thinks he's got something up on his buddies, not knowing, like an idiot, he's made an oath to something he doesn't even know. I'm not going to get into that. And by the time he figures it out, it's, sorry to say, too late. The Knights Templar then become essentially Satan's recruiting mechanism here on Earth today. That's the Masonic secret lodges. Now, we're not done. Because what happens is the Roman leadership, it then moves into what we know today as Spain and France, England, countries of what is now the European community. Now, I do find it odd that it was predicted that Rome would go undercover. It would go secret until the very end times, and then they would come out again. And don't you find it odd that, again, the same powers that are behind our money are the ones that have brought these 10 European nations to form the European Union? And that, if you want to look at it, is Rome too. And the United States is a part of it. And if you don't, just look at our architecture. Our Capitol buildings, our state government buildings, they're built off of the same architecture that was built in Roman, go back, and Greek time. You can follow this footprint throughout history. There is a massive pagan edifice in Washington called the Washington Monument.
Yeah.
It's the same pagan monument you'll find in every capital around the country. I'm going to mention this now because we're going to bring this up later. You'll also find a pagan monument in Dealey Plaza, which is where JFK was killed. And we're going to be getting to that in a minute.
Whoa.
All right. We're now at Rome too. These rulers have gone underground, and perhaps this now starts to make sense why you'll hear these stories of how our presidents are all related to English royalty and the Bushes are related to the popes, and you'll understand that we are dealing with bloodline families that were always in power. They never left power. They simply went hidden for a while. The Roman dynasty morphed into the Catholic Church, the Knights Templar into there. All of these groups and institutions and many more working in unison, but not necessarily aware of the big picture, began to occupy conventional positions in our modern day society. Again, you can be in the army, you can be a grunt, you don't know the whole picture. All you know is your job is to go into this little village and shoot it up. That same concept of compartmentalization is still at work today in our military. It's why the entire Manhattan Project, which was really a project of three people, Teller, Oppenheimer, and Einstein. Through that, they had 150,000 people working in Arizona, all working to create the worst weapon ever made on Earth, but not knowing what they were working on. And if you can understand that even our Vice President, Harry S. Truman, didn't even know we had the weapon and he was a Vice President, you start to understand how secrets are kept. All right. Moving on. Satan's not a one-trick pony. Like any chess master, he's got a long-range strategy, and he is out to deceive his opponent because this is a spiritual war, and it's based on what you believe. Because if you don't believe in Jesus, you are not going to be able to get into heaven anymore. That is essentially the law that God put down here. It is the evolution of the original law God gave man. When Jesus came, he was the fulfillment of it. And that is in absolute play today. We're going to start to flash forward here. Because we go through the Dark Ages, Satan's gone quiet. He starts to get his existence out of the vernacular. up through the 1500s, people were certain Satan existed. I mean, go find out what the Inquisition was about. The people that were establishing the New World here in the United States, I mean, we had things like the Salem witch trials, which, to us that is portrayed as something that was evil. But that was our Christian founding fathers recognizing that there was a demonic influence that was beginning to get a foothold in this new country, and they went in and just wiped these people out. They've been here forever. Around the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's when things start to pick up. Now, remember I said what happened in 1900 AD that might be linked to the release of these fallen watcher angels? Technology revolution. The same technology that anyone that researches ancient history, they will be able to tell you that, yes, the Egyptians had access to electricity. We've found evidence of nuclear weapons. We certainly have seen the evidence of genetic engineering. All of that knowledge, which was starting to get into human hands, was wiped out when the library at Alexandria was burnt down. I don't think the information was burnt down. Who took it? The Masons did. They kept that information secret. That became the crux of secret societies, the mystery schools. Is essentially the truth of our world, how things really operate. In 1900, it's all of a sudden, we now go from essentially, for 1,000 years, we've been an agrarian society where one of the greatest inventions was the horse collar. And we go from riding bicycles and horse-drawn carriages to a mere, that's in 1900, to 30 years later, the Nazis are beginning to work on an atomic program dealing with particles that can't even be seen with the naked eye. Think about that for a minute. Hyperspace leap jumps in technology. Where did that come from? Did humans all of a sudden get smart? Things were happening in the late 1800s. Remember the Masonic link. 1859, Darwin comes out with his theory of evolution. Now, it's still taught in our textbooks. Darwin, go look it up, was a 33rd degree Freemason. How ironic. Evolution in scientific circles is an absolute joke, but it's still taught in schools. There are some people that actually still believe in evolution because that's what the mainstream media talks about. They call it quote-unquote science, but they never really describe what the science is behind it. I actually looked into it for myself, and believe me, it's a religion. To make it a very long story short, what we call a simple cell, which is what Darwin said, found its way from the ocean onto a beach and somehow divided itself and then formed into something that was human-like, and all these multiple systems that all rely on each other to operate somehow magically formed at the exact same time. See, we didn't know DNA existed in 1859. We thought a cell was the smallest thing. What we didn't know is that inside that cell is DNA. And why is that significant? DNA is a computer code. It is information. And its origin cannot be explained by evolution any more than Microsoft Windows could be explained by evolution. And believe me, when you put random chance and mutation, ask any computer programmer what happens to his computer program when you start to mutate little parts of it. Does it get better? Does all of a sudden you have a program that becomes a Microsoft? No, he's got something that just doesn't work. So this whole concept of us evolving, if you look into the science of it, you'll find out it's a complete fallacy. In fact, the only one out there really promoting this theory is Richard Dawkins through the God delusion. You're not going to find very many scientists that can say it because in scientific circles, it's been absolutely disproven. However, Satan's no idiot. He does know, like Hitler did, control school books, you control the population. I do find it interesting that it was the Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan families at the turn of the 19th century that took over our education system and created the curriculum we have today, essentially to keep us dumb. That same Rockefeller Foundation, which promoted the concept of equal rights for women, which I absolutely think is a wonderful thing on many levels, but also has a macro effect on our society. And what it did, the benefit to these bankers was that all of a sudden now every household had two tax revenue incomes, and you now had children that were being raised by the state in these schools because mom and dad weren't home to do it anymore. And the core of where we had gotten our knowledge for 2,000 years, which was essentially from the family, from a Bible, from a little schoolhouse, from your neighbors, it was switched in 1900 because we started getting that information from the state. And ridiculous fallacies that are the building blocks of what we consider to be the most basic information of our world, which are actually false, to this day are still taught as if they're true. All of it, again, is a part of a small little grain of sand towards an all-encompassing plan to get the entire planet to reject God. Now, again, if you understand the concept of entropy, it's the second law of thermodynamics, and that is things only break down, okay? If evolution can happen, someone's garage around here somewhere should have organized itself into a working Mercedes-Benz. Now, has any of you ever seen that? No, things break down. When you clean up a room and you leave it, it gets messier over time. It does not organize itself. That cannot happen without intent, okay? Evolution needs intent because we discovered DNA long after Darwin died, and Darwin himself said, look, this is only a theory. It will certainly be proven over time because we're going to find billions of fossils, not one missing link, but we need 1 billion missing links between each type of creature that the theory says takes us from apes to man. We've never found them. They don't exist. All we have are different species. Now, there is evolution within a species. That's different. But a cat will never turn into a dog. A can of peanut butter is never going to turn into a palm tree. In my lifetime alone, Jiffy has probably manufactured 10 billion jars of peanut butter. Have you ever heard of one morphing into something? If you start to ask yourself these questions and look into it, and yes, I know, we're talking about the core of our beliefs. These are hard things to accept, but the theory of evolution, which is essentially a religion we call science, is really based on your faith that Darwin was right, and that means it's a religion. So if you believe in evolution, really, you're the one that's operating in a faith-based religion. Eric, 10 minutes. All right, so I got to wrap this up. Ellen, this is going to be tough.
Maybe we'll do part 2 next
All right, I'm going to start cranking through this. All right. Things start happening in the late 1800s. We're just exiting the Iron Age. We're agrarian, horse-drawn carriages. We're dropping nuclear bombs 40 years later. Around the same time, 1871, again, another 33rd degree Mason, General Albert Pike, in our military, sends a letter to another 33rd degree Freemason in Italy by the name of Giuseppe Mazzini. The book 10,000 Famous Freemasons and many other books will talk about it. They discuss how Mazzini was a Mason and a past Grand Master nonetheless. Now, here's what's interesting. Of course, secret society has to operate in secret. They don't have radio and internet and communication like we do. They have horse-carried messages. I find it very interesting that the reason we know about the existence of the letter I'm going to read you is because the rider that was messengering this message from Albert Pike to Giuseppe Mazzini was struck by lightning. And when the local authorities came to investigate the death of this rider, they found on him this letter written in 1871, published with certainty in 1925. Some people suggest that it was in the British Museum as early as 1908. And here is the letter. This is written by Albert Pike before this happened. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia. I'm going to shorten this. I don't have time to read the whole letter. Let's just understand that's exactly what happened in World War II. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantages of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. Well, this war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. Now, this was with certainty written about before the war happened. Start to think about this, guys, because the things that are happening in our world, this has been by design. After the Second World War, communism was made strong enough to begin taking over weaker governments. In 1945, the Potsdam Conference between Truman and Churchill and Stalin, a large portion of Europe was handed over to Russia. The other half essentially goes to the United States. Pike goes on to say, the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the Agentur, or again, the Illuminati, and essentially the differences between the Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. What is a Zionist? I don't have time to get into that right now. It's an offshoot of the state of Israel. Let's just leave it at that for now. This war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Now, do you see that happening today? It's sitting on our doorstep. 9/11 began the militarization of the Middle East for us. If you really understand what 9/11 was about, it was about getting our military into the Middle East to help prepare for this. All of this then, after this Third World War, with the world in ruins, out will come the Savior of the world. The Bible would call this the Antichrist. The satanic coterie on this planet will call this their God. The Jews are waiting for Jesus to come the first time. That's what he's going to be to them. The Buddhists are waiting for the sixth Buddha to come. He will be the sixth Buddha. Islam is waiting for the Mahdi. He will be all of them to all people. He will unite the world, and everyone, there will be peace and security on this planet for the first time. And now we're getting into what their future plans are that haven't happened. Hopefully by seeing some of their plans in print from 100 years ago and how they've actually come to be might wake some people up to the fact that we are heading down this path right now. And obviously the terror attacks of 9/11, which was my entry into this whole thing, is how I got here. So what's interesting is all this technology explosion was led by Nazi Germany, who ironically practiced the occult. Now, what is the occult? It's a demonic religion, and it's the religion of praising and worshiping these false gods or these fallen angels. The same exact ones from Rome, from Greece, from Babylon. They have never left. Through the Nazis, go look into their occultic connections. Look into the technology the Nazis had. Well, what happened? Yes, Germany lost the war. But what happened to the Nazis? Well, half of them went to Russia. The other half then came to the United States. And who did they become? They became our modern-day Central Intelligence Agency, which had been the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. That is what became our CIA. This is very important. Hold that thought. We now have modern day 5 minutes. Oh, man. Ellen's going to kick my ass. All right. I'm going to keep going as fast as I can. Where are we here? Okay. To give you an idea of how the Nazis may have been demonically motivated, by 1942, they're clearly losing the war. They were turned back at Stalingrad. And the rest of the war would be a shrinking map of their territory. All that red swastika space we've seen on all those maps on TV, all it did was from there on out, it shrank to the point where it completely surrounded Hitler's bunker. And what did Hitler do as this happened? Was he pouring his resources into the front lines of the war? He actually was not. It was in 1942 that the final solution, that is the extermination of the Jews, was put into high gear. He actually devoted military resources to trying to exterminate the Jews. Why? Think about that. Many theorize that if he would have wiped out the Jews, there would have been no remnant left with which to reform Israel, one of God's most precious prophecies, one of the most unbelievable ones going back 2,000 years. That obviously failed. But consider, I think that pouring those resources into the murder of those people, I think is an indication that could have been, frankly, demonic. Anyhow, Pike predicted World War II. He predicted World War I. World War II ends. Germany loses, not the Nazis. We get a show trial with 21 low-level patsies at Nuremberg. But the real intelligentsia, the real evil, it's brought into the United States. That the part of the Nazi war machine, the SS, the Gestapo, the intelligence, they become our CIA. Many of them also go to NASA. Now, that'll be important, too, because that is a very big part of this picture. Now, flash forward 15 years to the end of World War II. Okay? Kennedy is in office. All right? Modern-day conspiracy theorists, Ellen, now we're here. I think Kennedy was our last real president, and it didn't take him long to figure out what was going on. The CIA, under his presidency, tried to start several wars. Just a couple of them. Khrushchev and Kennedy were set to meet in Paris for détente. On the eve of that meeting, the CIA, without his authorization, launched the U-2 spy plane with Gary Powers that ended up crashing. It wiped out those peace talks. Now, what you don't know behind the scenes, that plane was not shot down. All right? That plane was insufficiently fueled. It was meant to crash land. See, the CIA had been wanting the U.S. to enter war for some time. The Central Intelligence Agency launched an attack on Cuba, expecting Kennedy to bring in air support to save face. But Kennedy said, no, I am not doing that. Because he started to realize what the real purpose of the CIA was. He realized that this is an evil entity. And if anyone that's seen JFK and studied history, the two things that JFK tried to do to knock out the power base, the demonic power base in this country, is he wanted to splinter the Central Intelligence Agency into 1,000 pieces, to remove its power. And what else did he do? He wanted to take us off of the central bank's ability to print our money. He put $4 billion of self-printed American money into circulation because he knew the forces he was up against. He may not have learned it when he became president, but by 1963 he knew. He certainly gave many speeches warning us about it. We've all heard the speech about how the very word secrecy is repugnant and how we are facing a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy that uses covert means, that uses assassins by night. Now, do you think that's the Russians? Who do you think he was talking about? 10 days before he was murdered, he flat out said, I've got to alert the American people about this conspiracy. Of course, that never came out because the powers that be had him executed. And they had their man, Lyndon B. Johnson, waiting in the wings. From there, the CIA successfully launched the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Again, another false flag, like all wars that are started. This one leads us into Vietnam, and the rest is history. Kennedy tried to stop that power from progressing. They killed him for it. JFK is the launching of modern-day conspiracy theory. And another way of saying that is the beginning of what modern-day search for truth looks like. Satan, the demonic powers of this world with the control of media and publishing houses and movie houses have the vast majority of this population. Frankly, the first thing they do is slough off most conspiracy theorists. But when you look into it for yourself and you get if JFK was really killed by one lone gunman, do you think 89% of the populace would believe that was a lie today? Why is it that 50% of the people don't believe anymore that it was 19 guys in caves that did 9/11? Because they're doing their own research. The internet has allowed us access to this type of information in a way that it never has. We're not going to have access like that forever. Learn now while you can. The information is out there. I'm going to have to pick this up next week. But now we're going to start to get into modern-day conspiracy theory because all of them are footprints of this demonic conspiracy. They are all related. Yes, chemtrails are related to fluoride, which is related to the alien question. Oh, the question that turns everybody off. But if you don't understand that that is an integral part of what is coming, you're going to be fooled. And you are going to make the worst decision that your soul could ever make. And you're going to end up lost. And I'll explain more about that next week, assuming I survive until then. Until then, I also want you to know this. God is real. God cares about you. The people that align themselves with God, that's who's on the winning side. See, the end has already been written. You only have time to figure this out now, because if you wait, it's going to be too late. Do it while you can. Peace to everybody, and I'll talk to y'all next week.
Podcast will be available here in a few minutes. You can catch last week's show also.